It's been a little while since I had a laptop in, and this is a great one to come back on. This is the XMG Focus 16, a CPU-focused monster of a machine, and XMG does things a little differently than your average laptop maker. You can customize your machine straight from the factory. Their sites will let you pick what GPU you want, and of course things like RAM, SSD, and even what keyboard layout you would prefer. I spec this machine with the 13900HX, the only CPU choice you get, and an RTX 4060 laptop, which has 8GB of VRAM, also 32GB of SK Hynix DDR5-5600 RAM, a 1TB Crucial P5 SSD, and naturally the UK ISO layout. It's worth pointing out that you can get this with up to an RTX 4070, along with up to 64GB of RAM, and there's actually two M.2 slots inside, so you can have up to 8TB of total SSD space in this if you have the cash for it. Now, since XMG claims that this is a more CPU-focused machine, I'm going to start off with the CPU performance from that monster 13900HX. That has 8 performance cores and 16 efficiency cores for a total of 24 available cores. It comes with a 55W plus TDP, although I've run these tests in the performance mode in their software, which you will see pumps that up a fair bit. Now, it's important to note that especially for the Puget Bench suite that I normally use to test the Adobe suite of apps, you can't compare between different versions of that test, so I don't have any good data to compare to. Tests like Cinebench and Blender, though, haven't changed. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context for just how insane this chip is. Cinebench single-threaded already shows promise. It's over 100 points faster than the 12900H and 500 points higher than the 6900HX. In multi-threaded though, it's a complete landslide. Of course, comparing a chip with 6 P-cores and 8 E-cores to one with 8 P-cores and 16 E-cores isn't exactly apples to apples, but my god, that's a lot of performance to have in a laptop. Blender shows the same performance. The BMW scene is now under 100 seconds, over 40 seconds faster than the 12900H. Gooseberry is even more impressive, with its run being completed in under 9 minutes compared to over 12 for the 12900H or over 14 minutes for the 6900HX. I'll flash up the Puget Bench scores here as well, just quickly, so that you can see what they're like, although once I get some more machines in, these will start to make a bit more sense in context, but suffice to say that these are pretty good scores. The last thing to mention here is the power and temperatures. Surprisingly, the 12900H actually draws more power than the much faster 13900HX here. It's still an absolutely insane amount of power to be drawing in a laptop chassis, but it is over 10 watts higher. Despite that, the 13900HX ended up running at pretty much the same temperature, although if I'm being honest, that's not exactly surprising, as these chips tend to just turbo until they hit that sort of temperature and then start throttling back. When it comes to performance in games, I tested at both 1080p and the native 2560 by 1600 resolution, and across 7 games at generally medium to high settings. The machine averaged 231 FPS. Not bad, eh? Now, CSGO and Rainbow Six Siege do inflate that number a fair bit, but generally you'll find pretty much any title is a good experience on this. Even a CPU-heavy game like Microsoft Flight Simulator ran at over 110 FPS on the medium preset, which is really impressive. Of course, you would probably want to run the games at 1200p instead of 1080p so that you don't stretch the image or have just black bars on the screen, but the performance should still be pretty close to what you've seen here. At 1600p, the native resolution, the average dips to 167 FPS, which still doesn't sound too bad. On the whole, it isn't too much of a drop from the 1080p performance, although strangely Fortnite on the high preset with no TSR or DLSS ran pretty slowly at 58 FPS average. Flight is still above 60 though, actually over 70, and both Cyberpunk and Shadow of the Tomb Raider are sitting pretty just below 100 FPS. Only the esports titles like Siege and CSGO actually exceeded the display's 165Hz refresh rate though, which is a bit of a shame. Of course, since you can option this with an RTX 4070 laptop GPU, you might have better luck with that one getting closer to that refresh rate at the native resolution. And speaking of the display, let's take a look at that. XMG claims this covers 95% of the sRGB spectrum, and it sure does. It actually exceeds the sRGB spectrum a little, with my Spider X reporting 99% coverage and 77% of the DCI-P3 spectrum. That's not bad at all. Also, XMG sells themselves short here with the display with a claimed 400 nits peak brightness figure, but I measured it at over 550 nits. That means you could somewhat comfortably use this outside or say on a train next to the window, if you can handle the fan noise anyway. What also impressed me were the black levels. Now, it's no OLED or even a VA monitor, but it managed to hit almost a 1300:1 contrast ratio, which for an IPS panel is really pretty good. What's even better is the color accuracy. It averaged a delta E of just 1.42. Which is a pretty decent result. There are a couple that break through the delta E of 2 threshold, but overall it's a great panel to use. For content consumption or even content creation, I'd actually be pretty happy with this panel. The 16:10 aspect ratio makes it a good choice for video editing, as does that color accuracy. Couple that with the top shelf CPU, and you've got a pretty killer content creation machine. Taking a look at the more gaming focused test though, namely the response times, of course tested with my open source response time tool that you can pick one up yourself at osrtg.com if you're interested, you can see just how slow this thing is. It averaged over 10 milliseconds, or almost 2 whole frames at 165Hz. While that's far from the worst that I've seen, it's not exactly great. It could definitely do with having an overdrive mode available in their control center software, as it's clear that this panel can be driven a fair bit harder than it is. As for input latency, as is pretty typical for a laptop, even one with a muck switch like this one, it's a bit higher than a desktop. It averaged around 11 milliseconds of on-display latency, which equates to about 2 frames of latency. While a desktop system, even one with a sort of similar amount of horsepower to this, would be under 1 frame, this isn't too bad for a laptop. When it comes to the actual gaming experience, on the whole, I would say that it's pretty good. The slow response times do mean that motion is a little smeary, especially in fast-paced games, but it's not all that bad. Once I got my eye in, I had a pretty good time with it. Temperatures are generally kept in check. The only area that gets warm is sort of just below the display, and I mean the left side of the keyboard stayed perfectly cool, and nothing got unbearably hot, save for the actual underside of the laptop, although sadly that's pretty common these days. The keyboard feels pretty soft, which I think works well for gaming, although a little less so for typing and sort of regular usage. I am used to a mechanical keyboard though, so if this was my sort of daily driver machine, I'm pretty sure that I would get used to it. It's certainly not off-putting. The massive, and I mean ginormous, trackpad actually has great palm rejection, as it didn't trip up or sort of turn on while gaming at all. It does occasionally stutter and lock up, especially if you haven't used it for a little while, which can be a little frustrating, although it's not all that common, so it's not the biggest deal. One thing that might bother you though is the I/O. You only get 2 USB-A ports, one of which is USB 2, and both of which are on the left-hand side of the machine. You do get 2 USB-C ports, so if you want to, add more USB-A ports, you can live that dongle life. But it's a little annoying to, need on a relatively thick machine like this one to need those sorts of dongles. DC in is a bit of a funky and rather chunky rectangular port. You actually get mini DisplayPort as well, something I haven't seen in quite quite a while, and HDMI for your display outputs, a microSD card reader, a separate headphone and microphone jacks, and even Ethernet too. A quick look inside reveals the absolute beauty of the cooling package. It's all copper. It's shielded, has heat pipes for days, and exhausts on both the back and the sides. It does sound like a jet engine while gaming though, and in fact, have a quick listen. Just for reference, this is me speaking at a sort of regular conversational volume, and well, that's quite loud. That's quite jet engine-y. Despite that noise, it is an absolute work of art in here. It's really easy to get in as well, just regular Phillips head screws and a gentle bit of prying gets the bottom cover off. From there you can see the relatively small 73 watt-hour battery, the currently empty second M.2 slots, and the SODIMM module RAM that you can easily upgrade yourself if you need to. This is great. There's no anti-tamper stickers, no security screws or complicated clips. It's easy to get in here and clean it or upgrade anything you fancy. Sure, it's no framework machine, but it's still pretty good. On the whole, I quite like the Focus 16. It's definitely swinging more to be a creator-focused machine, and the shocking 8GB of VRAM you get in the 4060 or 4070 laptop GPUs is going to quickly become a problem, especially with a 1600p display, but also that's kind of hardly XMG's fault. The build quality is pretty good, the screen is relatively nice if a little slow in the response time department, and the performance is pretty good too. It's a bit on the noisy side, although with this much power in a laptop chassis, I can't really blame it. It is mostly just airflow noise, not like whining fan noise or anything. Pricing wise, it depends on how you configure it, so I'll link their site in the description, but as tested, it's a hair over €2,000, which sounds about right for this kind of configuration and spec. I'd be pretty happy to recommend this overall, although as always, take that with a grain of salt, especially as I haven't tested any other machines in a sort of similar class recently, so there's a good chance that I'm missing a better option, although regardless, it's hardly a bad choice. So with that said, those are my thoughts, but I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. What do you think of the XMG Focus 16? Is this a machine you'd pick up yourself? Would you go, if you were going to pick one up, what spec would you go for? Or is there another option that you think I should be recommending or checking out at least instead? Feel free to let me know in the comments down below. I'll leave a link to their site if you're interested in taking a look at them, maybe configuring one yourself. And if you want to see more videos like this one, you can hit the subscribe button, turn on the bell notification icon, check out plenty of other reviews in the end cards when they pop up in a second, and you can also support my my ramblings and reviews through YouTube, Patreon, pick up a hoodie or t-shirt like this one, or a load of the designs that I made myself, or you can pick up an open source response time tool if you fancy being able to test this sort of stuff yourself as well. Otherwise, that's kind of it. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.